It's obvious that the nation states are about to go to war over playing games with the flow of energy. But then they're going to add a whole new level of suffering in the feudalist tradition, which is make the peasants suffer. Well, we'll just turn off the lights for a while. We don't care. You'll still have high electric bills. That's why you're going to freeze this winter if you live in Europe and places. They're turning off all of the energy sources, and the foods not being produced, and what there is in circulation is obviously going to disappear at a pretty fast rate coming up. And imagine the gouging that's about to happen. And that all on top of what you were talking about, the biggest transformation of wealth that's been happening.
As we move through the times, there's a great awakening happening. The way that the economy is working is so all bare to see now on how fake it is that governments can actually make your life inflate away to nothing by just a turn of a switch and plans to add extra 1 trillion to the economy, take 1 trillion out, add 6 trillion to the economy, take it out on a whim and make people lose their homes on a whim. Like, you can actually see the plan now in real time where they're so in your face. We're going to do this. We're going to raise the rates. We're going to do this. We're going to cover 1.5 trillion for margin calls on electric prices in Europe. We're going to do this. Well, how did prices get that high anyway? See, the workings in the cogs that we don't normally see in finance are out. Emperor's naked, has no clothes. So as we move through these next weeks, when people's lives become a little more difficult, a little more inflated, supply chains are going to lock up super glue style. Well, again, it's a plan. I'm here with Ransom Godwin tonight, 420 TV, Freedomist Films. A supply chain thing and the grand solar minimum 400-year solar cycle that would be disrupting food production. So now there needs to be explanations for disruption in food production. So when you're taking down all the smelters and all business and manufacturing across Europe, the chemical plants go down, and the ammonia production that produces fertilizer and the urea and the potash, that all goes down at the exact same time. Everything you're seeing is a reaction to what would be a natural cycle on this grand solar minimum. The excuses need to come hard and heavy. And I was writing something down earlier. And Ransom, I'll ask if you agree with this. Every single new distraction is faster and more intense than the previous global thing, quote unquote. The time seems to shorten, but the intensity seems to double on each of these distractions. Because, we went from COVID, but actually, if you were following the same finance stuff, which I was back in 2019, you would have seen that the overnight repo market, or the lending market from bank to bank or institution to bank or government to institution, and then they swap within there, and they get like 5.25% per night to get money in there to lend it out. That was in 2019, though. But it relies on a degree of trust that company will pay back that bank in the morning, because you're only borrowing it for 12 hours. So, as our world spins, some people go to bed and the money is not being used. Well, they would swing it into another market for like 8 hours, then swing it to another market for 8 hours. But the whole thing worked because everybody paid it back after that time period of 12 hours of overnight lending, or 8 hours, whatever it was. Something happened in the middle of 2019 where that totally stopped, where banks didn't trust banks. Governments were like, no, I'm not giving you anything. You're a government, and I don't trust you that you're even going to pay me back. So then it locked up. Russia, China, and India are saying goodbye to the U.S. dollar as Biden is paying off student loans and printing more money. Earlier this summer, Putin announced a new reserve currency along with Brazil, India, China, and possibly Saudi Arabia. The global de-dollarization trend is accelerating, and some say the new reserve currency called BRICS should be backed by gold. And JP Morgan said September 21st, the Fed will do a mega-sized rate hike. It sounds like this is going from bad to worse. Mention the Adapt 2030 channel. You'll get some great service from Patriots, protecting Patriots. Patriot Gold Group has a no fee for life IRA or 401k that can be in physical gold or silver. And you may be eligible for the no fee for life IRA on qualifying rollovers. Call 1-800-356-4470 for your investor guide today. Patriot Gold Group, Consumer Affairs top-rated gold IRA dealer 6 years in a row. Call 1-800-356-4470. And now on with the video. Think about it as if you're in Vegas or something and you're putting money down on the roulette table. Well, there's money in there that can be taken out if somebody wins. But if there's zero money, then you're staring at a blank table and there's not even a single bet, then what? Then there's no liquidity is what we would call that. There's nothing in the pot. That would have been the 2019 thing. And then if you were looking at that going, oh, whoa, that's going to crash the markets. Holy smokes. How are they going to deflect from that? This is a global cascade that would be even worse than 2008-9. That was in 2019 when the repo market locked up. Then I see COVID come in. But then again, I'm looking at the grand solar minimum 400-year cycle, knowing that the onset of crop loss is occurring right now where the jet streams and cloud cells will flow to different areas. Cosmic rays will add a different band of clouds from, say, 18,000 to 23,500 feet or so. So now you have all these different variables in the atmosphere, not locked in place because our magnetic field on the planet is weakening along with the sun's magnetic field. And it does it on a 400-year cycle. And once you see that weakening, you understand that the cloud cells and the jet streams and the new cloud layers from cosmic rays are going to bunch together, and you'll have once in 1,000-year storms. And other areas further afield got totally rained out, so it's drought. There's no cloud building like there used to be in the normal pattern. Needs to be excuses for that. Now, looking at it from that lens and coming in going, wait, what happened in 2019? They need to lock the planet down so people can't move around. And excuses amok need to come because you are going to go into a famine. It will be in lower developed economies this year, where you're going to see things that you thought were not possible to see on how many countries are going to starve at the same time. And then that'll be the next distraction. See, I'm already forecasting somewhere out in November-ish. Give me a 30-day window. I'm calling a huge thing here. Around November, there is going to be story after story, and all you're going to see is humanitarian aid, just mass starvation stories across the news headlines. Because what's happening everywhere right now, in the immediate term, is the biggest distraction ever, because you got Europe locking up, electrical prices, America's going to be following with that. Fed's doing their thing with the economy, but everybody can see it in real time. So now they're going, whoa. We need to do away with your organization because you're manipulating the market. There's no free market. Are you kidding me? You're telling us that they're going to raise the rates to 5, 6, 7%, take $1 trillion off of free money you gave over during COVID to all the companies that enriched themselves and gave the bonuses and the payouts and the golden parachutes and all that. That was all COVID money into the companies. Now they're like, no, we need to pull it back. But where they're pulling it back from is me and you. So you can see the give out there with this quantitative easing and endless money and COVID relief and all that went out there. That was for companies, and they absorbed it all like sponges. It's never coming out of them. They're contracting. They can't operate. Not enough electricity. Where's the money coming from to pay back and pull that trillions out of the economy? It's coming from me and my pocketbook and things that I'm paying more for. But Ransom, I'm babbling, man. Thank you for joining me tonight. It's going to be a great show.
Yeah, it does seem like everything's moving at an exponential rate. But the more that it happens, the more it seems planned. This just seems to be the perfect time. We've talked before about this new system being set up after whatever disasters. I was going to say September 23rd, if you've been paying attention to the sun there, we may have some blackouts from a natural reason. Just if the sun burps like it did when it was facing away, what if it does that here coming up? And then on top of that, that is all you see around the world. There's all that flooding in Pakistan. Imagine the amount of displaced people. And, you keep hearing these once in 100 floods, but then again, the rivers are all drying up, exposing all these artifacts of ships and, things like that. All of these weird things in the news. Look at all the power grids. Italy is begging, but basically, they're saying, hey, enough of this. We need the energy. And Russia's saying, we'll let you freeze. We'll turn it off. So you can see this developing in kind of a nightmare scenario. This year just might be the first year in several years in a row that people are going to have a taste of famine, no power. So just imagine in the future when more and more saps buy into this electric green movement and totally ignore the fact that it's all coming from fossil fuels, which are being shut down everywhere. it's obvious that the nation states are about to go to war over playing games with the flow of energy. But then they're going to add a whole new level of suffering in the feudalist tradition, which is make the peasants suffer. Well, we'll just turn off the lights for a while. We don't care. You'll still have high electric bills, high food bills. But what if your refrigerator ain't cooling the food that you buy? You're having rolling blackouts or timed periods that the electric companies in cahoots with the green movement have decided to just turn off your electricity for a while. And it just so happens to be at the coldest and hottest times of the year. Between the earth is on fire. That's why it's freezing. That's why you're going to freeze this winter if you live in Europe and places. They're turning off all of the energy sources and the foods not being produced, and what there is in circulation is obviously going to disappear at a pretty fast rate coming up. And imagine the gouging that's about to happen. And that all on top of what you were talking about, the biggest transformation of wealth that's been happening, I would say since 2008 actually is when they first started to initiate the actual transfer of funds in all of the various ways. The attack in 2001 was the kickoff for that, the financial center of the world, the trade centers. But all the way from that time to now, that's all it's been, is taking all of the money from what's called the middle class or blue collar workers or whatever you want to call it in all of the first world countries. And then we're in a position to beg for food, beg for power, and we're just so happen to switch over to more of a Marxist ideology in all these countries at the same time, too. So complex, you would think that an AI has to be writing the script at this point. Just to your point about the distractions, the Queen of England dying, and then we're going to have a king. It's kind of like Aleister Crowley described their new age, where the earth had to be covered in before they could live in their, fancy Doomsday Wilt age of Horus, the golden time or whatever. I think that's what a lot of these elitists are tripping on. And think about the new king there that's been staying at Vlad the Impaler's castle. And if you go back into their ancestry, you know that their family kind of moved in and they had to change their name over to Windsor whenever they took over the royal line there. Where would you think that someone like Vlad the Impaler would be on a council back in the day in 1447? And he's in a council, right? It would be like today's World Economic Forum, where all of the supposed rulers of the earth get together and decide what they're doing. And so if we assume that, let's get to what they're saying. Since 2019, you can see it in the financial trends that these massive amounts of wealth are being moved and that everything is being shut down. And then you get to the supply chain and the pandemic and et cetera. And it just seems like they let all the cards out at once because they're pulling the plug. They say it themselves. It's the great reset on control over humanity. It's real interesting where this is about to go as far as a world stage, because in Europe, it seems to be easy to light the fuse, though. They just push all of the countries against each other. When I was in school, they called that a shatter belt situation. And isn't that exactly what happened when the Soviet Union broke up? It shattered this whole area back into multi-factions, or what they used to call the Balkan. I'm ready to see the sides being picked. Italy seems to be wanting to side with Russia because they want energy. I'm predicting right here in this year, you're going to see some kind of like the floods, once in 100-year things that nations are going to start proclaiming. And also, a lot of people don't know that there's lots of pirates out there around Somalia in those areas that are constantly taking ships. And it hasn't changed. Actually, it's been increasing because of all the turmoil around the world. So it's really interesting how this is going to unfold.
Yeah, so many things are happening in September. See, I also had another message sent to me, and it would directed me over to somebody's Twitter feed. And it said, "You will never forget where you were on September 24th. And I started to think about that for a second, in your life, moments in time where you were. Because my parents, they remember exactly where they were when JFK was shot or something like this. If you remember exactly where you were, if you go back a couple generations, they knew exactly where they were, and they heard the news about Pearl Harbor, they knew exactly what the hell. It's going to be one of those moments. You knew exactly where you were at 9/11. The September 24th was the same thing. You're going to remember where you were. So I'm thinking, what is that event? The global electricity stopped because of some CME that came rolling in. That would definitely be a remembrance. Not only would you have the experience of a power down because of the CME, but you would have the experience of something that large, watching that halo come in and electrify the atmosphere. To the point where you're going to see that hit and wrap around and then start trailing in like filaments of electricity or plasma as it would hit our Earth. If you had clear skies and you could see up to the stars, literally you would see a red coma come around the planet when that would happen. If you saw that dancing in the sky and then you were at, let's say you're more north than I am and you were somewhere in like northern Michigan or right at the border, you're up in Canada somewhere or more like Norway or something, you would see a full red coma come around the planet and you would see plasma come down. Perhaps the ground to sky effect would occur, but where that plasma terminated, it would start dancing and you would see the canyon walls come to life again and you would go, oh my, I saw that on a canyon wall somewhere. If we go to that kind of knockout where you would remember where you were from a solar flare knocking out that much electricity, that's what you would see. How interesting is that? We're kind of in this end times period where many prophecies are overlapping. Time scales, everybody's pointing to September, and every large economist that I ever watched, ever in the whole history of anything I ever knew finance, they're all 100% saying, yep, it comes this year. This is the end of the economy and civilization as we understood it. It's going to reassemble itself. There'll be a new monetary system. Society will shift greatly. But we are critically at the end of this thing. It ends this month. The beginning of the end of it is this month or whatever day it is. And it rolls for a couple months and everything's reset. So then add on top of it a massive solar flare that came in and made plasma petroglyphs dance around the skies. Then we have an event to remember. Because, thinking about events to remember, and I'm so glad you brought up a happy memory there about the Balkans for me, because I got to travel around Croatia. It was such an exquisite country. I even went to the Czech Republic also. So I learned about the Czechoslovakia whole thing during the communist time. And the Czech Republic, it gets dark like at 4:15, 4:30 in the afternoon. You got to drink honey mead to even like stay awake after 4 p.m. It's very dark in terms of like light, not a lot of light in the wintertime because we went there just before and after Christmas, try to catch a Christmas festival in Prague. Same thing in Croatia, but Croatia was super, like energized and very light. So those two countries are very different. You think the more north would be more Christmassy because it would be Christmas. Now everybody's hunkered down inside and everybody's pounding alcohol. And during that time that the alcoholism was unbelievable. Like 60% of the dudes there, we're talking an older generation, like 50s, 60s, and 70s, like 60% of the guys were alcoholics. There was nothing to do. And they want to take Europe back to the same planned economy again, like the entire continent. This time, nobody escapes. Because what's so interesting is I didn't know this about the U.S. after World War II. They just sat there on a map and like pretty much threw darts and said, okay, that one's going to go to over the Iron Curtain over there. Okay. Oh, Austria. Oh, good call, man. That thing just banked left at the last second. Okay. That's going to go over to NATO. All right, throw. And that's exactly the way they did it. And when I saw like Slovakia and Slovenia and then, heading down into what was, you said the Balkans, stunning place. If you ever want to travel, go there. It's the most amazing water in the Adriatic Sea. And I'll tell you another thing about plasma. I visited this place in India many years ago. This is like early 1990s when I first started traveling. I barely even had traveled before. And I went to India and we were cruising along the coast. And there's this place called Hampi, which is southern India. And the entire place is made of these boulders that are exactly the same size. So if you go to a beach and you scoop a handful of sand, pretty much all the grains of sand are about the same size. And you notice it, like everything's pretty uniform. You might get one big piece here, one smaller, whatever, a shell. But it was the same way, but boulders the size of your car or the size of a room in your house that formed mountain ranges as far as the eye could see. Go over to Croatia and see the same thing. Instead of having red sandstone boulders of the exact same size making mountains, instead of that being red sandstone, this time it was that sort of white limestone or that what you would see across Greece and Italy on the hillsides where they're growing olives, that kind, but in the exact same grain sizes. We were in a place called Rijeka, and a little bit further if you go to the Istrian Peninsula, they have this old town up there called Pula. If you stay in Pula overnight, you can go to this old Roman Colosseum, and there's literally nobody there, literally 0 people. And you can just sit in there and drink wine, and there's nobody there. And you got this second largest Colosseum on the entire planet, but 0 people were there. And I was like, what is this place? So anyway, when you get there and you start taking the bus and you head down, you start to see the same exact thing. I am absolutely unequivocally stating the Adriatic Sea was sculpted by a plasma bolt from another planet or whatever, however that works, electrically interacting to cause that, what you consider lightning plasma, to come and sculpt out the entire Adriatic Sea and blow the different same exact size particles. Now, if you could see where the trajectory of that wind would go, on the ionizing wind, it's going to go a certain direction. That's why you see that shock pattern that forms when everything cavitates back on itself. That's Andy Hall's work on understanding the blast patterns and how that supersonic wind sends the channeling. And you see also ridges within mountains that look like sort of dinosaur scales going up the side of a mountain, all in the same direction. That's all that supersonic wind. Think about this. We always talk about Göbekli Tepe and how it was perfectly buried, and they knew it was buried. They said it was buried by humans because everything was the exact same size of the soil, and it must have been a sacred site. Every size of grain of whatever soil was put back in, it was almost like it was filtered and filled in. They were so amazed by how everything was so uniform the way it was buried. We'll take a different tack. What if Göbekli Tepe, functioning religious site at the time, that arc of plasma sculpted out what was flatland, not an Adriatic Sea, all the way down to Turkey through Greece, sculpted that out, and that ionizing wind from that distance, but obviously piled boulders right next to the Adriatic Sea, which we drove by for hours and hours and hours, and I mean like 3,000 feet tall of these boulders, all the exact same size like I saw in India that time. But if you go several hundred miles, you're going about 400 miles or so, 450. Instead of being boulders where that ionized particle strike was, it would be grains of sand. It would be soils that were exactly the same size. They would have flowed over, just like sand dunes do. You know, they find that thing buried on the side of the mountain. Would you remember where you were if you saw something like that? Because September 24th is the 50-year Jubilee, the Shemitah, if you believe in such things of cycles of allowing debt to be absolved and start completely over. Let your land lie fallow for a year. September 23rd, the autumnal equinox, or for the autumn equinox. September 30th, Vatican has all gold, silver, and equities and anything liquid asset that can be sold at the moment, brought back to the Vatican Bank, firewalled from the rest of the system. And at the same time, the railroad's going to go on strike too, because their arbitration cool-off period is finished. They think that Biden will make an executive order where they can't go on strike. They're barely running right now. And everybody's retiring. They're all sick. And this is the problem. You can't squeeze blood from a stone. You couldn't train Ransom and I to go run a railroad in like weeks or months even. It takes years to get that training, especially around all that heavy moving equipment. Geez, that's just an accident waiting to happen. And accidents really frequently happen, even with 30-year veteran running the yards out there. So I don't know, Ransom, it seems like a very big and crazy, incredible month and a lot of things happening that are going to define history in the next 30 to 60 days.
What you were talking about, these plasma things, make a lot more sense now that the James Webb Telescope pretty much has proved that the Big Bang Theory never happened, because they started looking out there and they realized, you know, they had flawed equipment before, and now they're seeing that it's an electric universe and there may be no end to it, the way that people thought that it started from a singularity and then moved out. Those concentric circles photographed a star that has that around it. And it's funny that you brought up Göbekli Tepe, because I was already on that train of thought. It seems like maybe 12,000 years ago or so, there was a civilization that got reset. And it might have taken some time. I don't know how long it took, but it took a while, it must have, to get rid of all of the artifacts, evidence, civilization type stuff, so that whenever civilization started again, there just really wasn't that much proof. And it seems like the same thing is going on right now. And you brought up Göbekli Tepe. That's an example of someone leaving writing on a megalithic monument, which is pretty unique because, as you know, most megalithic stuff does not have any writing from the builders on it. However, Göbekli Tepe does. It does have an edifice. It has drawings on it or carvings on it. And it did relay some information from that time to the next period. And it seemed like, for whatever reason, they knew they needed to bury it to send it into the future. But how that relates to right now, it seems like for the past 20 years, the governments of the world have been actively trying to not only destroy the ancient history that we found. As you know, ISIS has gone around blowing up all of these old Buddhas and cuneiform text that's on walls and on monuments. God knows how many tablets have been seized and stolen since 2003 and put in private collections. So all of the ancient stuff is disappearing. And now we're getting rid of the old world but recent empires, because you have to get rid of those older empires if you want to start a new one. It seems like they're selling out Europe and all of its culture and history and trying to erase that from memory. And it probably would only take a couple generations after a new system was put in place where the young adults wouldn't have any idea of the previous world at all, because everything had been either erased by collapse or erased on purpose.
Because the way I was looking at it also, talking about these 400-year cycles and this grand solar minimum, as it's called, sun steps down in a 400-year low of solar activity. Jet streams, cloud cells, they go out of their normal flows, things bunching up, and then we got all these new clouds because of the cosmic rays. So now we have three sets of variables squeezing out and ringing out in the wrong places. But other flows are going to start. So if things are knotted up somewhere in the atmosphere and it creates its own new knot or heaviness or bubble or whatever you like to call that, pressure dome, once that sets up, then other flows start to move around them. Now, if you knew what the new setup would be and where the new flows were going to go, you could set up new agricultural areas in Northern Africa, the Sahel, these different areas of Africa that you could also enjoy the natural above-ground rainfall increases because of the blocking patterns from this new magnetic field, allowing our atmosphere to move differently. Now, if you'd studied several of these cycles, you know exactly where, once this place locks off and starts blocking high, it's going to push moisture. Now, you could look at the North African monsoon for an example on a 4,600-year cycle. You can look at the West African monsoon on the same 4,500-year cycle, and it's getting really wet across all those northern African nations. They got record crop production. Now, see, if you go further down, you don't have all the natural precipitation because of that shift yet. It'll be another 100 years or so. But you could tap the Nubian sandstone aquifer and all the different aquifers that are under Africa. 100,000 cubic kilometers plus of water resources directly under the feet. With innovation from Europe and the United States, could tap that and just flow it, and unbelievable production could be gotten out of what we consider the Sahel, a desert now, or Northern Africa, which is increasing in grain production naturally just from the above ground water and the new rainfall patterns setting up. The world needs to set up a new grow zone, and Canada goes offline because, generally in grand solar minimums, anything 45 degrees north latitude and above and 45 degrees south latitude and below to the Antarctic, generally they just don't produce nearly as much. Usually there's like a 90% plus decline in agricultural productivity. So then you get those periphery zones like 40 degrees north and 40 degrees south, and they're just, they're productive, but they're not, like they were before. They just gargantuan declines, probably, 30% knocked off that. And then you come down and you finally get some stabilization zone around 35 north or 35 south. That's a huge amount of grain production in the modern world, from Kazakhstan to Russia to United States to China, New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, Argentina. Okay, that's a huge amount of stuff to take offline food-wise. So if you knew the weather was going to shift based on magnetic field changes on a 400-year grand solar minimum cycle, you would look for a new grow zone. And the new grow zone would be Northern Africa. You could double crop that entire zone. Imagine how much infrastructure you need to lay out there. What the boon that would be to start rebuilding an entire grow zone on the top 50% of Africa, the largest continent on the planet. And just your company got the contract to go build part of it out for the water irrigation. Your company got for the wiring of it. Your company got for laying the roads. Your company got for the fuel distribution. As we go through this collapse, they're going to need to start somewhere again. Because there got to be confidence that there's going to be money made from a company so people want to invest into it or even go to work or even buy something because they might want to save their money for tomorrow because if it's not going to improve, why would I spend my money today? Like we go down to the very basicest thing here, like you're going to buy a loaf of bread or you're not. Because you could save that old stale bread and rehydrate it through like a bamboo steamer, or you go buy a new loaf of bread because it's going to be better tomorrow. That's how deeply it goes. So when we get to that point, which we will here shortly in months from now, then what? You're going to have to rebuild the world and start it somewhere with a new catalyst, a new spark of financial life. That is going to be the Sahel in North Africa.